Hi, I'm on a motivated run through the gorgeous city of Washington, D.C., and I'm going to talk to you about World War Z and why it should be on the Commandant's reading list. The goal is to get the Commandant to see it, or maybe some of the nerds that are down at Quantico who control what goes on this list. I don't know. I hope that by the end of this video, that is your goal as well. So in case you're wondering, what the hell is the Commandant's reading list? I'm going to explain it to you. If you're not wondering that, just skip to this timestamp right here, because I'm about to describe the MCM. According to Marine Corps Order, HALPA 1070.12 Kilo, it is a list of books that remain current and relevant and promote professional discussion. It can be split up into 4 basic categories. And the first is history, kind of like books like the Marines of Munford Point. The second is historical fiction, kind of like All Quiet on the Western Front. The third is tactical means of thinking, kind of like Left of Bang. And the fourth is fiction, so that Marines can put themselves into imaginative scenarios, such as Ender's Game. World War Z definitely fits into that 4th and final category. I don't want to get into any spoilers, so if you plan on reading this book, and I recommend reading the audiobook, by the way, because the voice acting is amazing, and it really captures the characters and how they experience their time during the zombie war. The reason why this generally has not been mentioned on the Commandant's list, I think it has largely to do with the way it's portrayed in other forms of media. In the movie, it's about Brad Pitt and his abs fighting zombies. In the video game, it's about your lineless character and his abs fighting zombies. But that's not the book I read at all. That really misses the subtext and the context that is in the book. The book is about politicians, service members, and civilians, and how they interact and how they juxtapose during an international crisis. Basically, the story is a series of interviews that manifest themselves as short stories. They interview a number of people from all over the world during their experience during the zombie war. And it's not just military people in the United States. You have people from Russia, China, Israel, Palestine, and Cuba. And if you know anything about anything, these names should definitely be dog whistles for you. Because all Marines have a basic understanding that knowing the cultural context of our adversaries is what wins wars. And open discussions about this is advantageous in modern warfare. So this book was written in the early 2000s, and the premise starts with an error in intelligence warnings, a ground zero, a decades-long blame game, millions of lives wasted, and billions in military resources costed. Now, where have we heard this before? That's right, this book is an enormous metaphor for 9/11, and it talks about the responsibility of officers to balance not only their own ranks, but also politics and propaganda. I personally am not an officer myself, but through this book, I was able to put myself into the shoes of the commissioned individuals who had to handle this situation. Now, naturally, I make a lot of parallels to 9/11 because I'm old and I remember 9/11, but there's also a lot of parallels with another book called War is a Racket by Smedley Butler.
And that should be on the Commandant's reading list too.
And yes, we all know the name Smedley Butler. He's the guy, he's the boot camp guy. But even more so than his 2 medals, this man is a genius. Like, I am a simp for Smedley Butler because he was one of the first people to coin the military-industrial complex. Naturally, the military and politics are intrinsically combined in a lot of ways, but outweighing the needs of troops and civilians in the name of profit is problematic. And where Smedley Butler talks about the literal sense of the military-industrial complex, World War Z talks about it in metaphor. They talk about how these people were concerned about placebo vaccines. They were concerned about misidentifying the virus. They were concerned about non-capitalist countries in the middle of the zombie goddamn apocalypse. So it discusses how a lot of these higher-ranking officers let go of their initial military values for the name of profit at the cost of human lives. But in this story, once the generals get their collective heads out of their asses, they return to the same values that we've had in warfare since 1775. That war, especially when it takes place on American soil, exists solely to protect Americans and American lives. And this is also kind of a metaphor for our current situation. They faced an unprecedented type of warfare, and they started with trying to copy the same types of warfare and recycle the same types of warfare they'd seen before. And that didn't work. It didn't start working until they started noticing the weaknesses in their enemies and actually studying their enemies. We see a similar thing today. In cyber warfare, there's a lot of generals and higher ranking officials that still try to use operations from OEF and OIF, when really it's a totally different beast. This guy interviews a number of characters, and from their points of view, you can see how their ethos and their core values degrade and then eventually get rebuilt by the end of the zombie war. And this is why, despite the fact that it is the most extreme example of attrition warfare, they still managed to pull through. Spoilers, by the way. Now, personally, I don't really think about anybody who's like higher than an O3. I just kind of go to work and do my thing and go home. But this kind of got me thinking about what it's like to be in the shoes of an 08 or an 09. They have so many things that they have to juggle. They have to think about politicians. They have to think about propaganda. They have to think about the actual image of their respective branch of the military. And they become the face of almost 1 million people. And that's why it's important to prioritize mission accomplishment and troop welfare over all that extraneous stuff. But this book isn't all about politics and generals and crap. That is so boring. There's also really motivated parts where they talk about the battlefield. They talk about the ruthlessness and the nationalism of the Russian military. They talk about the collectivism and the long-time planning of the Chinese military. They talk about the extreme lengths that India and Pakistan have to go through in order to finally come to a truce and fight these zombies together. But they also talk about the similarities that Israel and Palestine find in the face of a common enemy. And what's really cool is there's kind of a puzzle about the DPRK. None of the characters in the book know what happened to the DPRK, but the astute reader knows. They know for sure. But the most important part that he talks about is about the US military. He specifically has a part where it's from the point of view of a contractor, and he's talking about the United States Marine Corps. So I've got this quote right here. The Marines surprised me the most. I always bought into the idea of the stupid jarhead. I never knew that because the Marine Corps had to procure its assets through the Navy, because admirals are never going to get fired up about land warfare, that improvisation had to be one of the most treasured virtues. And then he goes on to describe the East rule. The lobotomizer, or the Lobo. The Marines came up with that one. Sometimes they made their own, using nothing but the steel of recycled cars. We made 23 million during the war. They won the war, and they're still making them today. This whole part of the story put me into the shoes of every enlisted person in the world, and then back into my own shoes. They were in the midst of chaos and zombies and hell, and at the end of the day, it was still just the Marine Corps that I recognize. And I haven't been this motivated about reading anything since literal boot camp, even though I get out in like 10 days. And the structure of this section of the novel kind of returns to Almar 023/20, and it eliminates the need for ranks within the reading list in 2008. And that's kind of what this book does. Everybody from a private that's just out of Paris Island can get something from this book by reading about how the Marines had to adapt and overcome in the midst of the zombie apocalypse. And even the Commandant himself can gain something from this book when it talks about politicians and the image of the branch that this person is in. And that's the crazy thing, is I'm just one person. I've only listened through this book twice. Both times have been like while I was driving and reading and not really paying attention. This book is extremely well researched, and there's a lot to be learned from the successes and failures of these fictional characters. So I would like the powers that be to please consider putting this book on the Commandant's reading list. Bye.